Okay, Leoman, I think you can open our discussions then.
Thank you very much, Doc. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm actually very excited to welcome you all to this webinar, which is part of the Wiley Campbell Webinar Series. This webinar is on our experience with Campbell Review in a world different from what most of us know today. Our experience sharing today will include 3 innovative approaches for increasing use of research evidence from systematic reviews. This experience suggests a community struggling to cope with challenges to evidence use and how the rest of the world is rising and providing support for that. Amayafo Lionel, also known as Leoman, I would like to share our kola nuts with you. Our ancestor says that he who brings kola nuts brings wisdom, and he who shares kola nuts shares peace. I'm a traditional African storyteller from Cameroon. Today, I am joined by 5 others of my international award-winning colleagues in this webinar. And I will be chairing the session, while Patrick will also moderate the session for us. The recording of this session will also be made available online for those who are unable to attend. Yeah, Patrick.
Yes, thank you very much, Leoman, for that introduction. I would also want to already call your attention to the fact that if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. At the end of the session, there will also be an opportunity for you to ask questions to the panelists. So as Leoman has mentioned, we will be sharing our experiences on 3 innovations for knowledge mobilization. This also demonstrates how knowledge mobilization can increase knowledge, intention, and behavior. My name is Patrick Okwen. I'm a medical doctor with extensive postgraduate training in health economics, public health, and evidence synthesis and implementation. Like my colleagues, I also boast of several global evidence awards, including the Robert Baruch Award with Campbell, the Cochrane Obresheham Award, and the JBI Clinical Fellowship and Leadership Award. I'm also the team lead at eBASE. Our 3 innovations today include storytelling, the eBASE Toolkit for Evidence for Disability, and the eBASE Teaching and Learning Toolkit. We will also have a formal talk with our IDRC Rachel de Roisier Fellow and storyteller Penka on decolonization of evidence, translation, and communication, and how this is Africa's gift to the world. Storytelling is an approach that is present in all human cultures, but storytelling as we present to you today is an innovation that overcomes barriers to evidence access. We will now engage in the presentation on storytelling titled Challenging Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Through Evidence Storytelling. This presentation will be done by Aweh and Akofu, a Grand Challenges Canada Stars in Global Health. She is also a teacher and advocate for underserved populations, and she's passionate about seeing kids achieve their dreams, no matter their background. She loves cooking, traveling, and interior design. Her Twitter handle and the Twitter handle of the different panelists will also be dropped in the chat box, so you can follow them and engage them in Twitter. Aweh, you have the screen now. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Patrick, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm happy to be here today. So I'll be telling you about how I used a Campbell review to get to SGBV victims in a rural and low literacy community in Cameroon through storytelling. So we'll be looking at what the intervention I used was, which is evidence story, and then we'll look at the project and how I used a Campbell review to help people make informed choices. And then we'll talk a little bit about the results and I conclude. So storytelling is a systematic, rigorous, and reproducible approach of getting evidence into stories for the general public. So back in the days in our local communities, kids used to gather around their mothers, especially after their evening meals, to listen to stories. Elderly men too used to go to the village squares, especially when the moon is full, to narrate folklore, which usually had a lesson or two at the end. So community members used to look forward to this kind of gatherings, and it is actually within this context that we came up with our evidence storytelling or evidence story day, but this time around backed by evidence. You might be wondering what language evidence story day is, but this is actually coined from our local lingua franca, which means let's talk evidence. So still on the previous slide. So this innovative approach helps to get research evidence to non-literate communities. And before community members get these stories, scientists will have to work with traditional storytellers to develop evidence stories. And the storytelling events are organized, especially in rural areas, as community members will hardly be able to understand all the scientific jargons that come with research evidence. So at the end of the day, they can make informed choices. So the work I did was actually using traditional African storytelling approaches to prevent and mitigate a wicked problem, which is sexual and gender-based violence for rural and low literacy communities in Cameroon. And the case study here is the Penka community. So our systematic African storytelling approach follows 7 rigorous and clear steps as seen in this diagram here. So the whole process is systematic and very, very rigorous. So our systematic African storytelling approach is like what you see on this diagram here. And the first thing we did in the community was to identify what the problem was, and in this case, SGBV. So a community diagnosis was carried out using interviews following the trans-theoretical model of change to understand the stage of change at which the community was. And after analyzing the data, we found out that the community was at the stage of denial. So stories were developed based on that to help move them from that stage to the next level. Then the next thing was, there was a search of evidence by the researchers, and they developed evidence statements from this evidence that they got. Then the researchers then met with storytellers who in turn used these evidence statements to come up with stories that they told to community members. And at the end, impact was evaluated to see if there was an improvement in knowledge and intention. Slide. So how we came up with the stories, we actually came up with stories from lived experience, from practice-based data, and from research evidence. So the first diagram you see there is actually an extract of our results from Max QDA, which was a story from a young girl who was raped and she came to us. And then the next diagram you see there is an extract from our hospital data, which told us that the post-exposure prophylaxis kits at the hospital were expiring because people were hardly coming for them, either because they didn't know that they existed or they were afraid of being stigmatized. And then the last one there, of course, is a diagram of a forest plot and a table from our research evidence. So the review we used was Rigobert 2013, which was looking at interventions to reduce distress in adult victims of sexual violence and rape. And each month we had a different theme, and this review was used in our month 6 event, whose theme was impact and effects of SGBV and seeking ways to address them. And from this review, after going through the systematic and rigorous cycle, the artist came up with Ingwari's story, which was a story set in a small farming community where stigma promotes silence on rape. This also further discourages update of medical, mental, and legal services by rape victims. It tells of a brave girl who overcomes all of this to get healthcare and justice, thereby coming out without any infections, pregnancies, and a perpetrator in jail. And this story is based on lived experiences, on practice-based data, and synthesized evidence from a Campbell review, which was a Rigobert 2013. So this picture here is another story that was showcased to community members about the importance of treatment following rape, And it is from this forest plot that can be so difficult to understand just by looking at it that researchers came up with this evidence statement that you see here, that the storytellers used to come up with their stories to inform community members about the importance of treatment following rape. So that is actually how the cycle goes. So we had a very interesting result as we're able to reach out to more people than we planned. In total, we had 106% project target achievement. And next slide. The blue bars here show the pre-test results and the red bars show the post. This was actually testing knowledge on the 6 forms of SGBV recognized in Cameroon. And you'll notice that there was a huge increase from pre to post. And the diagram below shows the mean increase. Slide. So we had many referrals and 136 of them accepted, and they now use the legal services which are available at eBASE, and 28 accepted to follow up with legal action, but at the end, only 8 took up legal action. So out of the 64 stakeholders that we interacted with who found the approach acceptable, 32 believed it could be improved into other sectors and programs. So they gave us some suggestions for improvements, including the use of digital platforms for storytellers, promoting household storytelling, and also engaging kids in and out of school. And we also had some unexpected results, like the child protection song, which touched over 1,000 children in the community and a further 26,000 out of the project area. Slide. So, community health workers also played an active role in our work, and 16 of them who were included at exit interviews trained, reported acceptability and feasibility of the use of storytelling at health facilities and household visits, including other programs aside SGBV. Slide. So we can safely conclude that the only way that the Campbell review can get to the victim in Tanka is through evidence statements from systematic reviews. And it is from these evidence statements that artists come up with stories which help which improves the well-being of the population, as they are now able to make informed choices, and as a result, knowledge is improved. And it is actually our smart innovation and results from Campbell's systematic reviews which helped us to achieve this. And at this point, I would like to thank Campbell and other databases for availing their resources to us. Thank you, and please share kola nuts with me. And in my tradition, they say, he who brings kola brings life.
Okay, thank you very much, Aweh, for that, for those great insights. Please, I would like to also say that please continue to put your comments in the chat and engage Aweh on Twitter as much as you can. You will still have the opportunities to ask questions at the end. Next up is Rigobert Pambe, and he is an evidence in Education Global Fellow and the Maiden Fellow from Africa. And he is a TVET teacher, that's technical vocational education and training, teacher by profession. And he's an active researcher at eBASE. Rigobert leads work on an evidence platform that is available in multiple language at www.ebaselearning.org. Andrea will share that link for us. And his work expands to Niger, Chad, and Nigeria, working from Cameroon. Today, Rigo will be talking to us about how we develop the eBASE Teaching and Learning Toolkit and the role of freely available evidence from the Campbell Collaboration database. His talk is titled Innovating for Teaching and Learning, the We Attain project. Rigobert, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for giving me the floor. Greetings, everyone. As Patrick rightly said, I will be giving a presentation on an interesting innovation called the eBASE Teaching and Learning Toolkit. And I'll be highlighting how the Campbell Collaboration has been instrumental in building this fascinating tool. Slide. But before we come to this, I would like to give you a little bit of context and walk you through our journey towards building this amazing tool for teaching and learning. The region we call Middle Africa at eBASE is comprised of 4 different countries, which are Cameroon, Nigeria, Niger, and Chad. And this region is prone to conflict and is a melting pot of several cultures, religions, and languages. Attainment in this region is among the lowest on the globe, with policy enforced to curb these challenges, not always backed by evidence. There is also several equity issues with underserved population portraying worse outcomes, and this further widens the attainment gap and contributes in foiling already existing conflict and promoting social injustice. So we understood the necessity to improve teaching and learning in our environment, and our first attempt was the teacher-to-teacher program, which is defined by the quote you can see on the screen, and it's a definition we have for it at eBASE. And in essence, a teacher will come with a particular challenge, and his peers within eBASE who have received training on evidence-based education will provide best available evidence to solve this challenge. I will further work with this teacher on implementing these best practices through a recurrent audit and feedback process. As an illustration, a teacher faced with high-level school suspension in his school came for us for strategies to reduce school exclusion. This was back in 2019. And at the time, the systematic review that permitted us to provide an answer was the Campbell Collaboration review published by Valde Benito in 2018. And some of the interventions that were proven to be effective were academic skill enhancement, monitoring, counseling, and skill training for teachers. So we worked with the teacher and together assessed compliance of current practices in school with evidence recommendation. And we noticed, and as you can see on the chart, on the graph, there was very limited compliance with evidence recommendation. We further worked with the teacher to implement these, to further work with his peers in the school for the evidence-based recommendation to be implemented. So the questions from the teachers came continuously, and in our quest looking for solution, we met with the Education Endowment Foundation, which had this amazing tool for teaching and learning, and they were willing to work with us to develop a similar tool that will be contextually relevant to our setting. And that gave birth to the eBASE Teaching and Learning Toolkit that you can visit by typing ebaselearning.org. So the eBASE Teaching and Learning Toolkit is an overview of educational research summarized into 27 easy-to-read topics or intervention or otherwise known as strands, and with key consideration for teachers. So it's a pointer towards what has worked, what worked best, or what did not work. And it's a great tool for any teacher or any school leader or any educational stakeholder aiming at improving teaching and learning in its environment. A particularity of our toolkit is that each of the intervention we provide to the reader information around the cost of the implementation, the strength of the evidence, and the impact in months of that particular intervention. So if we click on any of the strands, the information we'll be having we'll start by explaining what exactly the intervention is all about. Then the reader will be able to see key results from the synthesis, followed by the efficacy of the approach. And because this is a synthesis of many research, we go beyond the average for the reader to understand the variance and how that would influence implementation. We then give information to the reader on how this intervention can be implemented in its environment. And this is followed by an overview of the reliability and further readings on the papers that we use or that were synthesized in order to build this summary. So our approach is borrowed from the systematic review process. Thus, it makes it to be transparent and replicable. So we have predefined search criteria with inclusion and inclusion criteria. Studies are excluded based on either the topic, either the type of the study, or the outcomes, or and we also focus on the population. Our population are children aged 3 to 18. So all the studies that will be included will have their data extracted and they will be summarized, they will be synthesized and written in a language that a teacher can quickly understand. So in order for us to estimate, as I was saying, our impact is in months. In order for us to estimate our impact in months, we have a conversion table that estimates effect sizes into months of progress into the learner's life. And that is the table you can see on your screen. Concerning the strength of evidence, you can see is determined by the number of padlock. The strength of evidence is actually calculated based on the quality of the papers that were used in that synthesis, but also on the quantity. So it's a blend of the quality, the type of papers. Is it a meta-analysis, a systematic review, a randomized control trial, and how many of them do we have? So to understand how the Campbell collaboration informed the toolkit, we'll look at 4 particular strands that we recently developed. And these are the cash transfer, the menstrual hygiene management, the pay for performance and corporal punishment strand. So for the cash transfer, 2 systematic reviews informed this strand, and one of them was from the Campbell collaboration. However, you can see that we only have 1 padlock, and this is for the strength of evidence, and this is mostly because the systematic review outcome did not match with our outcome of interest that we had when developing this strand. For menstrual hygiene management, the strand was informed by 2 systematic review, 2 Campbell collaboration systematic review. However, you notice that we have 0 padlock, and we do not have any padlock. And this is because although this systematic review helped in shaping our understanding of what menstrual hygiene management was and the policies around menstrual hygiene management, the outcomes in this systematic review were not our outcomes of interest. So for pay for performance and corporal punishment, we did not find any systematic review at all in all the databases research. And this is a call for researchers and for funders saying that there's need for research in this field and in other fields of education in our region. So we have 27 strands in our teaching and learning toolkit, and those strands, numerous of those strands were informed by the Campbell collaboration reviews. So in a nutshell, our teaching and learning toolkit is a live tool. We have to update it as soon as a new research or a new research paper is published. So this is a call for researchers and for funders who are interested in producing or conducting research, producing evidence in our environment to roll up their sleeves and work for us to build this tool that will improve, these robust tools that will improve teaching and learning in our environment, and that will foster education-informed decision-making, evidence-informed decision-making in education. Thank you for your kind attention. I share Kola notes with you.
Thank you, Rigobert, for sharing these innovative experiences with us. And of course, we know the tradition for the chats, the questions in the chats, and engaging on social media. Next up is Nain Mirabel Yu. She's a multi-award winner as well, including winning the Africa Evidence Leadership Award, winning also the World Pulse Changemaker Award. She works at eBASE on a project that seeks to get research evidence beyond policy and practice and get this right into households, and especially for people with disabilities. Today, she will be sharing her experiences with using the Campbell reviews within the eBASE teaching toolkit for evidence for disability. Nain is also a Twitter queen, so be sure to engage her on Twitter. Nain, you have the screen.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Patrick, for the introductions. I'm super excited to join you guys this afternoon to share with you how I get research into the households of people with disability and my experience in using the Campbell review for this process. Slide please. So during my discussion, I'm going to walk you through how I developed an innovative toolkit that brings research into households of people with disability and how it works. Slide. A little bit of background. People with disabilities have been excluded from the evidence ecosystem, and evidence brokering has focused on practitioners and policymakers in the past, leaving behind people with disability in the evidence-based practice stream. So our approach sought to broker evidence into households of people with disabilities for evidence-informed decision-making and improved livelihoods. Our approach is inspired by a white paper on experimenting and learning in 2019, where he was talking about the 4 waves of evidence revolution and emphasized that the 4th wave, being evidence brokering, is the most important. So our approach is aligning with his thoughts. So how did we go about building the innovative toolkit? First of all, linking up from where Aweh stopped by asking how can Campbell reviews and evidence statements get to people non-literates in Tanka. She said through evidence statements, and she was elaborating on her storytelling. And I'm going to rephrase it and ask how can evidence statements or research get to people with disabilities. So our approach, we wanted to build an innovative toolkit that brings research, and this is how we started with a stakeholder session, including key informant interviews and focus group discussions to gather experiences of people with disabilities and to inform the design of the intervention. And we move further to geomap the location of people with disability and their experiences across Bamenda, where the project was being implemented. And we moved on to develop the PICO question, which we use for our search and research databases, including Campbell, Cochrane, JBI, EEF, Google Scholar, Government and Development Agency. We also emailed some authors to get their insights. So after searching, we went forth to synthesize the evidence. And after synthesizing, we now model the toolkit following recommendations from the WHO CBR document. So the toolkit is called the eBASE Family-Centered Evidence Toolkit and is modeled into 5 axes, according to WHO, including health, education, social well-being, empowerment, and livelihoods. So when we are done modeling this toolkit, we trained community health workers for them to explore aspects of disabilities during their regular household visits. So this means that when they are doing household visits, they will now bring this toolkit along and give evidence recommendations to households on how they can bond better with their kids through aspects of health, education, livelihoods, and social well-being. Slide, please. So this slide here summarizes the whole process of developing the toolkit. If you look at the extreme left here, you see stakeholder session with families of people with disability, and to your left, from that picture, training of community health workers, and to the left, extreme left here, the CBR document that inspired the development of the toolkit on 5 axes. And at the top, we see Campbell review that inspired this process. We also came across a very inspiring document, a best practice guidelines that was developed for people with disability in the Northwest region of Cameroon. So this was very relevant for our approach. Slide, please. So how did the Campbell reviews help us in developing this toolkit that brings research into the households of people with disability? The first thing, as I mentioned in the beginning, is that we search databases, and one of the databases include Campbell Collaboration database. And during our search, there were a couple of systematic reviews that were instrumental for our work, one of which was this Campbell review, community-based rehabilitation for people with disability in low and middle income countries by Lemmy in 2015. The sparking thing about this review is that it said community-based rehabilitation programs should be developed in partnership with people with disabilities to address local needs, priorities, and resources. So this was very instrumental for us. And this explains why we started with the stakeholder session with families of people with disability to discuss what they will actually see to say that this approach or this intervention is working. And this other systematic review, employment support for adults with disabilities in low and middle income countries by Tribney. And what Tribney was talking about here was employment support for adults with disabilities in low and middle income countries. Though this study has its population as adults with disability, it was also very instrumental for us in that it helped us to incentivize. It inspired us to incentivize the process of bringing the evidence recommendations to the households by telling families that when they do it over and over and score points, they are going to earn a seed fund for income generating activities that will support their unmet needs. Slide, please. So this project ran for a period of 12 months in Bamenda. And during this period, we were able to impact on 30 families, and we had a series of results for the 5 axes. So education, we had a mean percentile increase for education that moved from 29.9 to 70%. Health moved from 65 to 78%. Social well-being from 73 to 84%. Livelihoods from 16 to 37%, and empowerment from 27 to 65%. All these bars receive 4 bars in each session. This is based on the different household visits, actually 4 times during the 12 months. And this shows that during, for example, I'm just going to pick one like health. This shows that the impact on health, families are now able to discuss health aspects with their children, like, for example, follow up on their disability cards, talk about health issues, menstruation, sexual and reproductive health rights. On well-being, they're able to discuss with their share stories, folk stories with their kids, ask how their day is, get to involve them in play and make friends, help them make friends. This way, the families are able to get into the lives of their children, discover them, bond with them, and even discover the kind of children that they are parenting. Bonding is a challenge, and this is a double challenge for families of people with disability. So all this shows that there was a positive impact on our intervention. Slide, please. So there has been a lot of hype within the evidence revolution trend for getting research evidence into policy and practice. Despite this, little attention has been paid to getting research to consumers, who are paradoxically the final unit of evidence implementation. Therefore, it is important for policymakers and researchers to consider directing more attention into innovative approaches for getting research into households and citizens. Slide, please. Thank you very much, and I share Kola notes with you.
Thanks very much, Nain, for sharing these novel experiences with us. And I'm wishing you the best moving forward with your pilot project into a potential scale where we can evaluate the impact of this project over a larger number of participants and a longer period of time. As you can see from all the previous presenters, following evidence synthesis, it's still useful to consider how to get the information or the evidence to the end users, and particularly to citizens who need this evidence the most. You also notice that developing these systematic reviews and making them available open source and free online is the first step to equity in access to research evidence, use of research evidence, and in programs, especially development programs all across the world. Next up is Penka, Marthe. She's a traditional storyteller who joined eBASE some 5 years ago, and since then has gained interest in research into African approaches to knowledge brokering. She's also a multi-award winner, including a winner of the Festival National des Arts et de la Culture, or FENAC, which is a Cameroon. It's an award that's reserved for distinguished artists in Cameroon. She's also the IDRC Rachel Desrosiers Award winner for her work on infodemic in the COVID-19 era. She's also the vice chair for the Gene Africa community. Today, Penka will be sharing with us her thoughts and experiences with decolonizing evidence translation and communication, and how she has leveraged freely available Campbell systematic review data to get this work done in different sectors, in different fields, and different communities. Penka is also on Twitter, so be sure to engage her on Twitter even after this time. Her talk is on decolonizing actions within the evidence ecosystem. Penka, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for that introduction. So today I'll be talking on decolonizing actions within the evidence ecosystem. Decolonization within this context is actually a process of discerning, unpacking, analyzing, unlearning, and resisting dominant colonial influences at both individual and systemic level. It is also an approach used in reclaiming indigenous beliefs and practice. Despite the ever-growing body of research evidence, we still have this huge evidence to practice gap, which limit the uptake of research evidence within the decision-making process. And some challenges associated to this has been the complexity of research evidence terminology, the limited access to research evidence, and also the language in which the research evidence is disseminated. We also have the challenge of limited funding to support innovative knowledge mobilization approaches. The scientific way has a very complex way of communicating research evidence. And also this approach is generally, most of the time, even complex for researchers. The medium used to disseminate research evidence by scientists generally is less accessible to a certain group of people. I would like to talk about the background of our population in the world. It's important to understand that the world is made up of non-scientific citizens, of non-literate citizens, of non-digital literate, and also people living in resource-constrained areas with limited access to media to get informed, and even some areas do not even have electricity. So this shows how it is important to consider certain approach that can reach a wider range of people. Also, it is important to understand the dynamicity of the global indigenous language. Approximately 7,000 languages are spoken globally, and more than 2,000 native languages are spoken in Africa. So looking at storytelling as an approach to decolonize research, evidence, translation, and dissemination, I would like to quote some of my favorite African writers. We have Chinua Achebe, who said, when a tradition gathers enough strength to go on for centuries, you don't just turn it off one day. We also have Ben Okwe, who said, stories are the infinite seed that we have brought with us through the millennia of walking the dust of the earth. This is just to show that storytelling is an African approach that has been living throughout centuries. So if we are thinking of approaches to educate, to communicate within an African context, I would like to think of storytelling as that approach. Based on this definition, we see that storytelling has been part of the African culture, and it has served in passing on tradition, codes of behavior, to educate, to transmit values, worldwide beliefs from one generation to the other. The peculiarity of the storytelling approach we use at eBASE Africa is that we've been able to develop this approach into a systematic approach of 7 different steps. As you earlier heard my colleague Aweh talk about how within her work she used this approach. So this is what we use at eBASE too in all our storytelling activities. We have the first step, which is the identification of the problem. The second step, which is the diagnosis of the community, to understand at what stage of behavior change the community is in. And we try to move that community through our stories to the next stage of behavior change. So we also search for the scientific evidence. We develop the evidence statement, and we have the researchers and storyteller collaboration to ensure that the story told are actually evidence-based. We organize the storytelling session, and we try to evaluate the impact of the storytelling on the targeted audience to see if there was an improvement in knowledge, intention, and behavior. So looking at storytelling as a decolonization approach for evidence translation and dissemination, we strongly believe embracing this African-led approach can really increase evidence-informed decision-making in Africa. This is because storytelling are done in different languages. It is relatable to people of different backgrounds. That is non-scientific, non-digital, non-literate people can actually listen to stories and get the information you're trying to communicate. And of course, it is a cultural approach accepted by all Africans. And I would like to go beyond Africa to say most of us, if not all of us, are kind of acquainted to storytelling. It appeals to emotions while communicating facts. And of course, it is persuasive for behavior change as audience quickly identify themselves in the life of the characters. It's also non-confrontational in its communication approach. So talking of our experiences with Campbell Collaboration, we've been able to develop stories from some of Campbell's systematic reviews, and we have been able to communicate the stories to different regions in Cameroon. Next slide, please. Looking at our global experiences, our storytelling approach has also been used to develop the child protection song to educate children on sexual and gender-based violence. And our global impact on all our different projects has been, we've been able to touch close to 50,000 children. And also our storytelling approach has been used to educate people on menstruation literacy, how to fight myths and cultural stereotypes around menstruation. And we've been able to touch 10,000 adolescent girls in 3 different regions of Cameroon. This approach has equally been used to communicate COVID-19 recommendations from COVID-19 Red Map to close to 2,000 non-digital citizens of Cameroon. Still under our global experiences, this approach has been the focus of a training with the government of Western Cape in South Africa on solving urbanization challenges in Cape Town. We've also trained the South Africa Center for Evidence on how to use storytelling to communicate research evidence to citizens. And this has also been the focus of a webinar with WHO. So looking at our journey, eBASE started with a storytelling concept in 2016, where they practically just invited storytellers to come and tell stories on certain topics. But then with the funding from Ambassade de France, we were able to develop the prototype altogether with 3 different interventions. And then last year, with funding from Grand Challenges Canada and our project with Red Map McMaster, we were able to pilot this intervention. And then we are hoping to go for a trial in order to scale out this intervention. Looking at our indicators of success, we've been able to touch more than 100,000 community members. And also we've been able to tell stories in more than 4 different regions across Cameroon. We have also been able to train 40 storytellers to keep up with the process of telling stories even after we are not in these various communities. We've also been able to tell more than 70 stories. Next slide, please. So our hope for the future, we really hope that we could have enough funding for full trial of this innovative approach and also scale out this approach. We are also hoping to keep up building more solid partnership with other research evidence organizations for wider dissemination of their findings. So as a conclusion, I will want to emphasize again on the fact that this innovative storytelling approach is an African-led approach, and we see it as a gift to the world because storytelling doesn't just end in Africa, but it is an approach that can be used beyond Africa. So I will also want to emphasize on the fact that using storytelling for evidence dissemination can actually help enhance equity and also help enhance the access and use of research evidence for evidence-informed decision-making. And also it can help lead to a wider visibility and uptake of research findings. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Storytelling is not the only thing I share with you, but I also share our kola nut, which is our African culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Truly, Africa has a lot to offer to the global evidence community. Hopefully, we will be having you on the stage for upcoming global evidences to provoke our thoughts on evidence in different worlds. Now we will open the floor for questions. Andrea, I don't know if we have some questions in the chat box. I don't see any. Okay, I see one. So yes, Didier, you can unmute yourself and you can ask your question, please. Go ahead. Didier. Okay, while we are waiting for Didier to get ready to pose his question, I will also quickly take some questions round to the panelists. I am going to start with Aweh, since she was the first person. Okay, now I would want to understand from your presentations, you mentioned your work with or some results on acceptability with community health workers. I wanted to understand, can you share your experiences with working with community health workers? And do you think that moving forward, community health workers will still have a role in ensuring that this works? Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Patrick, for that question. So, like, as I said during my presentation, community health workers played a key role as they were the main liaison between community members and us. So the community members helped to facilitate storytelling for sexual and gender-based violence. Yeah, we trained them to tell stories alongside the artists and during the project. And they were also able to keep a daily journal, which they used to collect data. And they also told stories during household visits, and they referred cases to health facilities as well. So for your second question, I think moving forward, we intend to empower the community health workers in a subsequent scale out and also in impact evaluation. Thank you. You're muted.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I was talking to myself. Andrea, please let me know if there are some pressing questions in the chat so you can read this out and direct it to whoever needs to respond to this. While you are putting that together, I will also take the next question for the next speaker. And Nain, this is for you. Tell us how you engaged community health workers. I mean, I put the same question to Aweh. I understand that lots of the projects that we do, especially once it concerns the health sector, and sometimes it even goes beyond the health sector to maybe education, livelihoods, and other things. How did you engage community health workers in this, and how can you leverage this existence of community health workers within our system to get more results or to expand on your results? Thank you. Nain.
Okay. Thank you very much, Patrick, for that question. So during my presentation, I had mentioned that we recruited and trained some community health workers to explore aspects of disability during regular household visits. First of all, engaging community health workers helps to increase ownership of the project. So we are banking on this, or we are leveraging on this so that it's owned by the people. And what we did is that we sought for community health workers through health districts, and we recruited and trained them. Normally, community health workers go around to sensitize the population on health, to do advocacy. So leveraging on this, and they build a trust between the community and the hospital or the health sector as a whole. So engaging them to explore aspects of disability during their household visit is a good shot for us. So when they go for household visit or during their sensitization and advocacy sessions, they now carry along this disability toolkit, and which has evidence recommendations. This toolkit has a series of questions and recommendations for the families. So they're going to sit down, take out some time, sit with their families and ask them questions. For example, under education. They're going to be asking the families, are you sending your child with disability to school? If not, what is the challenge? And then they now give them recommendations why it's important to send your child to school. Send your child to school. They have the right to go to school. Are you considering your child for bank account? Are you considering your child for insurance? Insurance is going to help you when you least expect, and bank account is going to give this child a security. So they ask parents those series of questions, and they give them recommendations why it's important to engage their kids on those aspects for livelihoods and empowerment. They also ask the parents if they engage in livelihoods activities. For example, do you have something to support the needs of your child? If not, why not? Could you find something to do for empowerment? Do you attend PTA meeting for your kids? Do you go for community talks or meetings on health aspects for your child? This is where you're going to raise your voice for your child if at all they have a problem. If you had challenges accessing health resources, this is where you should raise your voice. So they give access, they give a voice, they strengthen the voice of the family to be able to speak out for the rights of their children with disability. So engaging community health workers is a good shot for exploring aspects of disability and empowering the families. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Andrea, do we have some questions? Do you want to throw up some questions for us?
Yes, Patrick, I can see a question from Didier. He says he wants to know how to enhance more exposure to the need for evidence-informed decision making in Africa. All the presentations are so great and grounded into evidence, but why is their use a problem? That's a question from Didier.
Okay, so I think that's a global question that can be answered by any of the panelists. So I will propose that either Penka or Rigobert can respond to that. Penka?
Thank you very much, Didier, for that question. Thank you, Patrick. So I will start by saying, just like we earlier mentioned, of course, there's research evidence. There's a lot of research evidence out there, but the problem is the use and uptake of that research evidence by citizens. And we think one of the reasons is because we have still not been able to really understand our context and see how we can use approaches that are contextually relevant to bring this research evidence to the community for a better uptake. So that is why I also spoke about the storytelling approach as one of those strategies that we can really help ensure that citizens are informed and actually take up the research evidence because they are able to understand the message behind the research evidence. Thank you.
Rigobert, you also want to throw in on that? Maybe you could also talk more about policy events and also maybe how we develop systems that are responsive to African policy making, still with respect to how we can increase the use of uptake of evidence. Rigobert, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Definitely, I think the DJ's question is right on point because we can really see this gap between evidence and practice. I mean, there is not enough evidence on the continent, but the evidence that is available is not actually being used. And generally, it's because stakeholders may not know that this evidence is available, or it may be available in a language that they do not even understand. So there's really a need for us to bridge this gap. And as Sophie talked about storytelling, that is very interesting and great for non-literate and to connect with people more easily. For policymakers, we have a varieties of tools to disseminate this evidence, to bring it to policymakers, and even to embed it within the existing systems. For policymakers, for example, we use the policy event as Patrick highlighted, where we have an occasion or a ceremony, a working session with policymakers, where we bring this evidence to them, make sure they understand this evidence, they identify gaps in their practice, and we work together on ways to implement this evidence in their practices. We also use audits and feedback, and audits and feedback is a very strong tool for evidence implementation, but also for behavior change. So we are piloting it right now in school, and it's a strategy we use to change teachers' office practice by comparing their current practices to best practices and giving them feedback on where they are doing well, but also where they have to improve, and following them up in a recurrent process for them to improve, change their office practice, but also change organizational culture.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are actually running out of time. I'll just give a last question for Penka, and this is moving forward. So I would really want to understand from you. You spoke so well about the concepts of decolonization and how we could build Southern-led initiatives, and I think this is really a good way to go ahead. But how can we leverage current trends on decolonization to ensure that we are able to get our voices out there, contribute to global evidence, and move on within this space? Thank you. We also, before Penka responds, Andrea, please just pick up all the questions that are in the chat. We will try to respond on this, maybe on Twitter, or we'll talk more and see how we can respond to this. Thank you. Penka, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for that question. So I'd like to say, I think one of the key organizations I would like to mention at the moment is the African Evidence Network. They have been doing a lot to ensure that African-led approaches are actually projected on the spotlight, and also the Capacity Manifesto stands as one of those approaches that could really empower more Africans. So I would like to look at this. I would like to look at the future from this perspective, encouraging more African-led approaches and actually collaborating together to promote these African-led approaches. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Penka. And I think there we have to round up at this point. We would like to keep talking, but the time is up and people have to go for other things. So I would want at this stage to announce the next webinar on this series, which is planned for the 6th of June. If you can just share the link, Andrea, if you can just share the link, be sure to register and do not miss. This is information on retrieval for evidence synthesis and how researchers in limited resources environments can do a comprehensive search. This is very important because doing a search is a very important part of knowledge use. So it would be good for you to try to follow and join and be a part of this. Thanks everyone for coming. I will leave over for Leoman to close the discussions. Leoman, you have the floor.
Yeah, Doc, thank you so very much, and thank all the panelists for a great work and on the research and everything. Just want to thank all of us for coming to this webinar today, and I pray that our ancestors should guide, walk, and lead your ways as you guys try to work with us in improving livelihood through innovation and best practices. Yeah, man.
Thank you very much, Leoman, and bye-bye, everyone.
Yeah.